Hey guys, welcome back to Storyslices. In today's video, a homeowner association despised farmers and ended up bulldozing my farm property, claiming I violated their HOA bylaws. And yes, in case you're wondering, my name is Ripe and I'm reading this story for the channel Storyslices, which is managed by my fiancé. And the title story starts like this. Let me start by setting the scene. I'm a third-generation farmer born and raised on this little patch of heaven tucked away in rural Pennsylvania. My grandparents bought the original 50-acre plot back in the 1940s after returning from World War II. It was just a modest farmhouse and some fields back then, but they slowly built it up over the decades through sheer grit and determination. By the time I came along in the 80s, we had an honest-to-goodness family farm going, cows, chickens, crops, the whole 9 yards. I cannot begin to describe how amazing it felt growing up immersed in that way of life. Waking up to roosters, getting my hands dirty out in the fields, learning the value of hard work and self-sufficiency from my parents and grandparents. Those were the days. Of course, though, nothing lasts forever. The inexorable march of suburbia arrived at our countryside oasis in the late 90s. Sprawling cookie-cutter housing developments started cropping up all around our modestly sized farm, swallowing up acres upon acres of once pristine land. An entire community sprung up practically overnight, Saints Creek Estates they called it. At first, we did not mind the new neighbors too much. Sure, it was a bit of a nuisance having all those city folks right on our doorstep, but we figured our way of life was well established and they would simply have to adjust to us. Rookie mistake on our part. It started small at first, people complaining about the rooster waking them up at 5 AM, or cows getting loose and wandering across the road separating our properties. Harmless stuff we could deal with, but then came the first HOA letter, an overly polite but sternly worded notice informing us that our agricultural operations violated their community bylaws regarding noise, odors, property values, and the like. We were being instructed to cease our farming activities immediately or face escalating fines. Now here's the thing though, we were never part of this HOA they created for the community. Our land predated their entire development by over half a century, we owed them no dues, followed no covenant, answered to no busybody board members puffed up on their own hypocritical self-importance. So then, when that first letter came, I politely but firmly informed them where they could stick their bylaws. That is when the harassment campaign from the HOA really kicked into high gear. Over the next several years, a steady stream of letters, legal threats, and in-person confrontations came our way from increasingly indignant board members. Apparently, the existence of a historic family farm clashed severely with their precious suburban sensibilities. How dare we carry on our nuisance of a livelihood within viewing, smelling, hearing distance of their idyllic community? The audacity, right? There were the standard official complaints citing nonsense zoning technicalities and arcane nuisance laws. Then came the more personal attacks, nasty grams from anonymous neighbors accusing us of diminishing their home values, attracting rodents and other pests, creating an eyesore, and on and on and on. I lost track of how many lawyer letters we received threatening legal action if we didn't voluntarily close up shop. At one point, they tried to argue that even though our farm predated the HOA, we had legally abandoned the agricultural operation for a period in the 80s after my grandparents passed away and my parents briefly downsized operations to just crops before I came back to reboot the full farm. I damn near fell out of my chair laughing at that shameless Hail Mary attempt to declare squatters' rights on my own land. For years, my family simply hunkered down and stubbornly weathered the relentless storm of HOA outrage. Our farm was our legacy, bought with the sweat and toil of generations before us. No amount of bushwhacking, legal manipulation, or fragile suburbanite hand-wringing was gonna force us out without a fight. Then came the incident that detonated a nuclear-sized can of whoop-ass directly squarely at these deluded HOA tyrants. About 5 years ago, I will never forget it, I was out in the east pasture working on some repairs to the old wooden fence when a thunderous rumbling came roaring up the gravel driveway. At first I thought maybe a tanker truck went rogue and was barreling towards my house kamikaze style. But as the cloud of dust cleared, I saw the unmistakable yellow steel treads and gnashing bucket scoop of an industrial-sized bulldozer, accompanied by a convoy of pickup trucks bearing aggressive-looking HOA logos on the doors. Men in neon vests and hard hats piled out as the dozer roared towards my home. I stood there in shock as the driver pulled up beside my house, lined up his blade and, you guessed it, started plowing straight into the side of my 2-century-old family farmhouse. Clouds of aged timber and siding exploded in every direction as this psycho went full steam ahead, demolishing the home I was born and raised in. My brain still cannot comprehend the confounding audacity I witnessed in those moments, watched in horror as this unthinkable nightmare played out right before my eyes. When the dust settled enough for me to see past the decimated husk of my home, the ringleading HOA guy himself came striding across my land in a 3-piece suit looking like a demented parody of a mob boss. This joker named Brent had the detached arrogance and overinflated sense of self-importance typical of every caricature HOA villain you've ever heard about on Reddit. He sauntered right up to me, smug cat that ate the canary smirk spread across his bloated face, and announced that my farm and home were officially being deconstructed for violating the HOA bylaws. According to his infinite wisdom and authority, he had unilaterally decided that I was A member of his HOA whether I liked it or not, and B, that the decades upon decades of farm operations equated to a violation of residential noise, odor, and cleanliness codes. Therefore, he had authorized my property to be slated for complete demolition, farm and home, in the name of protecting his constituents' property values and maintaining homogeneous community standards. When I demanded to know by what authority this was being done, he proudly produced a letter from a law firm he had commissioned to draft some sort of blanket annexation documents that allegedly granted the HOA oversight of my family's private property, dating back to the founding of this renegade BS association. Then came the real kick to my nuts. This diabolical farce of a land grab was not just about me. After removing my blight of a farm, the wreckage crews were setting up heavy machinery to carve up my land into dozens of residential lots that the HOA would then subdivide and sell off to folks eager to buy into the HOA community. So yep, these maniacs were not only trying to laying siege to my farm and home, but they also had the audacious goal of seizing my land outright and converting it into a profitable source of new homesteads to further expand their little suburban fiefdom. As the bulldozer of bureaucratic destruction continued pulverizing my ancient family home, I had to resist the overwhelming urge to completely snap. The only sane thought running through my head was, this cannot possibly be legal, can it? I wanted so badly to tackle this Brent clown to the ground and smash my fists into his face until he cried uncle, wanted to scream, throw things, call in the state troopers or something to shut this illegal annihilation down. But I knew if I escalated things violently from this point, it would only end up playing into the HOA's warped narrative. I had to keep my wits and fight this through the proper legal system, as inefficient and maddening as that would turn out to be. So with gritted teeth and fists clenched so tightly my fingernails drew blood from my palms, I looked Brent dead in the eye as my home was reduced to splinters behind me and defiantly said those fateful words, "Okay, a-hole, you wanna play? Then let's play." So from there on, I went full scorched earth through the judicial system. I hit these HOA crooks with everything I had. A gargantuan lawsuit citing extraordinary claims for damages, trespassing, destruction of property, emotional distress, you name it. I drained my life savings to hire the most bloodthirsty team of shark-like litigators money could buy. For the next 2 years, it was total legal trench warfare, motions, counter-motions, endless documented discovery, depositions, you name it. The HOA had money to burn on their squad of fancy lawyers, but I had the advantage of being undeniably and unequivocally in the right. My family's deed to the property predated the HOA's very existence by over 50 years, a historic fact they couldn't make disappear no matter how much legal muddying they tried. And by the way, in case you were wondering, of course, right after the HOA appeared at my property, I called the police. However, where I am from, the police is basically as useful as a fly on the windshield. Anyway, to help finance my fight, I launched a crowdfunding campaign that allowed thousands of fellow HOA-resistant sympathizers to pitch in a few bucks here and there. The story of these HOA thugs trying to bulldoze a multi-generational family farm for profit struck a national chord. Donations poured in from all across the country as my battle became a symbol for pushback against HOA overreach. I also sought restraining orders and injunctions to halt any further damage to my land and what was left of my property. The judge granted an emergency order for the time being, but it would all come down to the main court case to determine permanent measures. Throughout this saga, I have to give my brave wife and daughters immense credit for their strength and resilience. We were essentially rendered homeless, having lost the family farmhouse I'd grown up in. All that remained were a couple of slapdash temporary trailers haphazardly parked on what was left of my ravaged property. It was a challenging few years having to live amidst that dismal scene while the court battles raged on. When the main court case finally worked its way through the system, the HOA's legal avalanche started crumbling in spectacular fashion. It came out in discovery that not only was their annexation of my land completely illegitimate, but the entire demolition operation had been carried out using forged documentation and contractors being paid under the table in a blatant conspiracy to defraud the system. Brent, it turned out, had been operating a small-scale racket, hiring thugs and shady developers to seize private property under the guise of HOA authority, then splitting profits from unauthorized construction projects with them. An illegal scheme to demolish my farm and subdivide it into new home lots was just the latest and most egregious episode in his crooked campaign to enrich himself. As more and more evidence of corruption surfaced, the HOA's desperation became palpable. At one point, their lawyers filed a Hail Mary motion to try painting me as some homeless squatter brazenly trespassing and operating an illegal junkyard/agricultural plight on their community's rightful property. You could actually see the judges' eyes roll out of their skulls at that one. In the end, the judges overseeing my lawsuits wasted no time in not only vindicating me completely, but outright dismantling the HOA itself step by step as the full breadth of malfeasance was uncovered. I will spare you the tedious legal nitty-gritty, but essentially the entire HOA lost all oversight powers, governance, authority, everything they had. Multiple members of the old board faced criminal prosecution for fraud and financial crimes as well. So after a hard-fought battle spanning over 2 years and hundreds of thousands in legal fees, I was awarded complete and overwhelming victory. The court's final judgment awarded me over $3 million in liquidated damages, punitive penalties, personal restitution, you name it. Not only was I able to rebuild my family's farm from the ground up, but the enormous settlement afforded me the ability to purchase a vast part of the surrounding land that used to fall under the defunct HOA's umbrella. Suddenly now my lowly little farm expanded into a hundreds of acres agricultural preserve and conservation trust, forever protecting my family's legacy from future attempted land grabs. The former HOA busybodies who hadn't been indicted were left to stew in their own failure, impotently watching as their once tidy suburban kingdom unraveled into my own personal rural empire. I have to admit, after the magnitude of that legal victory fully soaked in, part of me did find some small satisfaction in sticking it to those HOA jerks one final time. I made sure to utilize every last loophole and exemption to operate my expanded farming operations without any hindrances whatsoever. Did the sounds of rooster crows and mooing cattle at 5 AM ruffle some entitled suburbanite feathers within earshot of my property lines? You bet. Did the occasional wafting aroma of freshly fertilized fields elicit grimaces and frantic window ceilings from the McMansion set? Like clockwork. But hey, I did not make the rules. I just played by the generous guidelines afforded to me as the court decreed agricultural preservationist presiding over these lands. To the HOA president Brent, who ended up behind bars, and his cabal of crooks, let's just say a memorably ironic form of community justice was served here. And yeah guys, if you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to like the video and leave some pizza slice emojis in the comments. But please don't leave just yet, because we have another mini story that I found in the comments of the story on Reddit, and it's actually really interesting. Here it goes. A few years back I went through my own nightmare dealing with a power-tripping HOA president in my neighborhood. Nothing quite as extreme as bulldozers demolishing homes, but it was a total headache that lasted way too long. See, my next door neighbor at the time was this retired older guy named Frank, who was one of the biggest busybodies I've ever met. This guy had been the HOA president for like 15 years and had this complex about maintaining the perfection and aesthetic integrity of our community, which really just meant enforcing a bunch of nitpicky rules to an insane degree. It started with Frank leaving me increasingly angry notes about tiny violations like my trash cans being visible from the street for a few hours or my lawn getting slightly overgrown after going out of town for a week. Just ridiculous tic-tac stuff that didn't bother anyone else. When I pushed back politely at first, attempting to discuss the issues like adults, Frank took it as a personal affront to his authority. And that is when the harassment and fines really started ramping up to an absurd level. $100 fines for parking a car in my own driveway overnight, $75 fines for unsightly potted plants visible through windows, stuff like that. It got to the point where Frank was shouting at me through my front door, leaving excessive notes in my mailbox every single day, and eventually trying to get me foreclosed on for not paying the ridiculous litany of petty fines that were accumulating. This guy was a total unhinged sociopath on a power trip. Thankfully, after documenting everything for months and getting lawyers involved, I was able to turn the tables. It turned out Frank had been illegally funneling HOA fees into his own personal accounts, enforcing through all kinds of code violations without proper hearings or community consent. Long story short, the guy got booted from the HOA board, ended up having to pay me a settlement, and was almost criminally charged before he issued a groveling apology. But those were some dark months dealing with his insane crusade against me and my total lack of respect for neighborhood decorum. Honestly, people with that HOA power complex become blinded by their own deranged senses of importance and entitlement. They let these micro HOA kingdoms go to their heads until they start abusing their authority in progressively more unhinged ways. Frank is just one example, but I've heard way too many horror stories just like the one in this post about HOA presidents and HOA boards going rogue and making people's lives miserable. After reading this story, I only wished the same could have happened to Frank and the other corrupt board members in my neighborhood's HOA when they were embezzling funds and violating laws left and right. But at least I got them out of power. And yeah guys, I hope you enjoyed today's HOA stories, and if you did, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I will see you again soon for more daily videos.